Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Race to Zero webinar series. This series has been organized with the support of our partners, the British Embassy, the Philippine Green Building Council, Puno Law, Green Energy Solutions Incorporated, Clean Air Asia, the University of the Philippines National Center for Transport Studies, ADIA, Green Architecture of the Philippines, United Architects of the Philippines, Oscar M. Lopez Center, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. To kick off our session, we will hear from Mr. Raul Manlapig. Raul is Arup's Managing Director for Manila and a member of the East Asia Region Board and the Southeast Asia Executive Board. Raul is also Arup's Sustainable Development Portfolio Holder for Southeast Asia. He leads multidisciplinary design and program management groups that provide services to the buildings, infrastructure, and consulting sectors. He has also worked extensively on a wide range of projects, focusing on buildings, seismic design, retrofit design, and geotechnical engineering. His experience spans Asia, the US, Middle East, and Europe. Here's Raul to officially launch the webinar series.
In 2 weeks, government leaders, along with other stakeholders from businesses, the academe, and civil society, will gather in Glasgow for the 26th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is also dubbed as COP26. For more than 2 decades, these COPs focused on discussing and developing a roadmap for taking climate action in the future. This year is different because the future is now. From here on in, the focus is on taking ambitious action on climate change without delay. This is not a task for government alone. All parts of society will need to innovate and act if we are to address this climate challenge and ensure that development is sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. This means that the private sector like Arup and civil society have critical roles to play. For Arup, COP26 is an opportunity to demonstrate that we mean business by saying that sustainable development is everything. This year's COP is particularly important because it will be the first time that national climate commitments will be put to the test. Are they honoring the climate pledges they made in 2015 at the COP26 in Paris? 6 years ago in Le Bourget, world leaders committed to an ambitious mitigation target of limiting global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels and to pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. They likewise agreed to ramp up efforts to adapt to the impacts of climate change and raise adequate financing and support, especially for countries that are the most vulnerable to climate change. The 1.5 degree target is particularly critical for island nations like the Philippines because large sections of its territories that are home to millions of people are under threat of submergence due to sea level rise. The global network of scientists that advise the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has also recently published a sobering report stating that while this temperature target is not yet out of reach, we can no longer afford delays. We need to rapidly bend the emissions curve downward to avert catastrophe. This means that we need to reduce global emissions 45% by 2030 and bring about further reductions to net zero by 2050. The Philippine government also signified its intent to reduce emissions by 75% relative to business as usual levels by 2030. Arup is committed to contribute meaningfully to achieving these targets. As an organization, we pledge to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. We have a net zero carbon strategy that sets out how we will reduce our full value chain emissions and compensate residual hard to decarbonize emissions with certified greenhouse gas removal. Arup is also committed as a partner to the UN's Race to Zero campaign, which is a global effort to transform talk about responding to climate change into real action. Race to Zero is about rallying leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, and investors for a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery. This webinar is part of this campaign and of the broader effort to raise awareness on the urgency of addressing climate change and to collaborate in delivering solutions in the country. We have invited speakers from government, private sector, civil society, and the academe to share their insights and experiences on four critical themes. These cover energy, transport, cities and the built environment, and nature-based solutions. In behalf of Arup, I welcome you to our Race to Zero webinar series for Manila, Philippines. I am also inviting you to join our sessions on Wednesday and Friday. For Wednesday, we will have a session on Towards Clean Energy from 11 a.m. to 12 noon, and another session on greening the transport system from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. For Friday, we will cover greening the cities and the built environment from 11 a.m. to 12 noon, and the role of nature-based solutions in addressing climate change from 2 to 3 p.m. I hope to see everybody there. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, Raul. To provide further context for this webinar series, we will now play several pre-recorded messages from our selected strategic partners. You will first hear from Dame Joda Silva, Arup's Global Leader for Sustainable Development and Director for International Development. She has led programs in Asia, Africa, and Europe, working extensively with NGOs, multilaterals, and UN agencies on a wide range of projects that focus on risk reduction in climate and community resilience in humanitarian post-disaster and development contexts. The next speaker would be Mr. Ken O Flaherty. Ken is the UK's COP26 Regional Ambassador to Asia Pacific and South Asia. He is a career diplomat who has worked on a wide range of issues, including climate change and energy. We will also have a message from Rachel Skinner. Rachel is the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers and the executive director for transport at the WSP UK. She has been granted honorary fellowship from the Society for the Environment for her work on the Shaping Zero program, an initiative that helps engineers and infrastructure professionals achieve net zero. And lastly, we will have Ms. Cristina Gamboa. Cristina is the CEO of the World Green Building Council, a global action network for catalyzing the uptake of sustainable buildings.
Climate action is a term that's used to describe the action that we need to take in response to the crisis that's being caused by climate change. That action falls into two categories. The first is addressing the causes of climate change, which is quite often referred to as climate change mitigation. At present, the temperatures in the world are just over 1 degree higher on average than they were in pre-industrial times. And the IPCC, that's the International Committee that looks at climate change, has published a report which has made it clear that if temperatures go beyond 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, then we're getting into dangerous levels of global warming for mankind. So the world is trying to keep global warming down below that level, which means radically reducing carbon emissions over the next decade. In fact, it means reducing carbon emissions approximately 45% globally over the next decade, so that by 2050, we can reach an overall target of net zero emissions. Climate change is already taking place, but the impacts of climate change will intensify over the coming decades. We're already experiencing extreme heat waves in many parts of the world, seeing bushfires elsewhere and extreme flooding in other countries. And this will increasingly become the norm. So we need to make sure that our assets, that's the buildings we occupy or the transport systems that we rely on are protected, and that we anticipate those changes to the climate and can make sure those assets will continue to perform in future, or if those kinds of events disrupt the performance, they can recover quickly. But we don't only need to worry about physical risk. We also need to worry about transition risk. Transition risk, it recognizes the fact that if we are going to get to net zero by 2050, that will require transformational change in every aspect of society. That transformational change means changes to policy and legislation. It means changes to financing. It also means changes to the expectations of citizens and customers. All of that means that businesses and governments are working in a very dynamic environment. And we also need to be able to look into the future and anticipate when those policy changes are going to occur, what the implications are for their citizens or for their customers, so that they can adapt on an ongoing basis. We can't afford to wait for other people to take action on climate change. We must all do what we can within our own sphere of influence. The situation is critical. Governments, businesses, and citizens all need to take action. The action that businesses can take falls into ambition, action, and advocacy. Ambition means deciding that you're going to be a net zero company and setting an ambitious target to reach net zero by 2050. There's a global campaign, Race to Zero, which is promoting this approach. Arup has made a commitment to reduce our emissions 30% by 2025, and that will enable us to reduce our emissions further over the remainder of the decade and be a net zero company by 2030. Like most companies, we won't be able to reduce all our emissions to zero, and therefore we'll need to offset some of our emissions, for instance, by planting trees that store carbon from the atmosphere. The second is to make a clear plan as to how you're going to achieve that target and to take the necessary action that's required across your organization, whatever it is that your organization does. Every company's action plan is unique because it reflects their business, but it's essentially about reducing the amount of energy that's consumed in our buildings and switching to renewable energy in our buildings and any vehicles that we use. It's also about reducing business travel and employee commuting, and doing that using electric vehicles or bicycles rather than cars powered by fossil fuel. And finally, it's about our responsibility as businesses for the goods and services that we purchase. So by setting a net zero target as a business, we also have the opportunity to influence our supply chain and encourage them to become net zero also.
Hello, I'd like to thank Arup, the UK's COP26 sustainability consultant, and all supporting organisations for holding this event and inviting me to speak today on behalf of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, as well as the UK's COP26 unit. 2 weeks from today marks a pivotal moment. Parties all across the globe will come together at the COP26 summit in Glasgow to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. In August, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published the first part of its 6th assessment report. This report is a wake-up call. The world's top climate scientists say that we'll likely reach 1.5 degrees warming within 2 decades unless we take immediate action. We're already seeing the effects of climate change on our doorstep in Asia, including extreme heat waves, tropical cyclones and flash floods, and those are only going to intensify. However, with immediate, concerted global action to reduce emissions now, the worst impacts can still be averted. There's real change happening across countries, civil society, and the private sector, and it's vital that the negotiations inside the conference centre reflect the reality outside. So as COP26 presidency, the UK has 4 core goals. The first is mitigation. We need to secure global net zero and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. We're urging all countries to come forward with ambitious 2030 emissions reductions targets and a plan for how they will reach net zero by mid-century. The second is adaptation. We need to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. Even if we stopped emissions rising today, the world would still need to deal with significant climate disruption. Adapting to climate impacts is crucial as we see these worsen. The third is finance. Realising the goals of the Paris Agreement and meeting global net zero requires a transformation of global finance. To assist developed countries must deliver on their commitment to mobilise $100 billion every year in climate finance by 2020 through to 2025. And last but not least is collaboration. Only by working together internationally can we accelerate the transition to global net zero at the pace required. With focused collaboration across governments, businesses and civil society, we can make real progress in the largest emitting sectors of power, road transport and land use. We expect COP26 to keep the possibility alive of the world staying on a 1.5 compatible pathway. The road ahead isn't easy, but each and every one of you watching have a part to play in saving our planet from this crisis. Let's work together to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this exciting series of Race to Zero events across Asia in the run-up to COP26. This is clearly a crucial effort to rally real leadership and commitment from practitioners, businesses, society and policymakers to help address the climate crisis right now. Through my role as president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, we have now put climate action at the very top of our strategic agenda. Right now, infrastructure, so everything that forms part of the built environment, such as transport, buildings, energy, water, waste, digital and more, infrastructure systems can be linked to around 70% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions because of the way that we plan, design, build and then use them over many generations. So civil engineers have an enormous responsibility and an opportunity to work as fast as we can to support a net zero carbon position while also making sure that our infrastructure is ready for and much more resilient to the increasing climate extremes that we know are coming in the decades ahead. We have a proud and respected heritage of improving communities and lives all over the world, providing sanitation and clean water, safe homes and workplaces, creating places and connections between those places to give ever more opportunities for our growing world population. But to now, our work has carried a carbon cost. Our challenge is to continue to deliver the same valuable outcomes for people and places, but to do it in ways that also halt and put right the damage to our environment, and doing more to protect communities across the world so they have the chance to thrive in future. Thank you.
Hello. The warnings from the latest IPCC report were another stark reminder of what we already know. Climate change is not a problem of the future. It is right here, right now, and it is negatively impacting every region of the world. If we don't take action now to drastically reduce emissions, we stand no chance of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The good news is the built environment has a big role to play. It can make a huge difference. Buildings are responsible for almost 40% of global energy-related carbon emissions and 50% of all extracted materials. By 2050, 1.6 billion urban dwellers will be regularly exposed to extreme high temperatures, and over 800 million people living in more than 570 cities will be vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal flooding. Also, the world's building stock by 2060 will double, and almost 70% of global population will be living in urban areas. So the building and construction sector's demand on natural resources accelerates climate change, and inefficient, unhealthy buildings negatively impacts human health and well-being. So efficient buildings has to be the biggest investment opportunity of the years to come, and it is worth 24.7 trillion by 2030. The good news is that we're working in this direction together. At COP26, World GPC is helping to convene stakeholders across the building and construction sector to highlight the built environment's massive potential to tackle climate change and build resilience for people and economies. This collaboration has led to the announcement of Cities, Regions, and Built Environment Day that will take place on 11th of November 2021. This is just the beginning. Now it's time to continue working together. Now it's time to follow shared climate action pathways. Now it's time to set exponential goals for sustainable buildings for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
I hope that the messages of our partners have helped to strongly define the scale of global climate issues and the need for countries to undertake targeted interventions. Moving on, we will be listening to two locally esteemed speakers who will be providing an overview of Philippine efforts towards our climate commitments. Firstly, we are grateful to have a message from Attorney Rachel Herrera, the Commissioner of the Philippine Climate Change Commission. She is also an alternate board member of the Green Climate Fund, the largest global finance mechanism for climate change projects, and the People's Survival Fund, the country's fund for climate change adaptation projects. Previously, she has been an advisor to the Philippine Senate committees on climate change, finance, foreign affairs, and the environment. She has helped to successfully deliver the passage of several landmark climate and environmental laws and international treaties, including the accession of the country to the Paris Agreement.
Thank you, and good day, everyone. On behalf of the Climate Change Commission, I would like to thank Arup for this opportunity to speak in this webinar and share insights from the Philippines on our efforts to increase climate ambition and the indispensable role that the private sector must play towards achieving our national goals. And as I deliver this message, we all know that severe tropical storm Kompasu, or locally named Maring, has been lashing out on the northern parts of our country with heavy rainfall and floods. And our farmers' crops have been washed away, and so will their homes and incomes for this harvest season. This happens within less than a month that Typhoon Kiko or Chantu also ravaged communities in our northern regions, and within less than a year since we experienced the devastation from Typhoon Ulysses, considered one of the most destructive typhoons in Philippine history. So when we think of climate change, tropical cyclones or typhoons first come to mind, occurring in succession and sometimes in the same regions, making our response and recovery all the more logistically and financially burdensome. At the opposite extreme are droughts and dry spells, which in 2019, we recall, affected 247,000 of our farmers and caused nearly 8 billion pesos of damage to the agriculture sector. That year, 51 of our local governments declared a state of calamity. The Philippines, as we all know, is recurrently affected by catastrophes. This is a direct quote from the yearly Global Climate Risk Index report, which has consistently cited our country among the most affected by climate change. And in the latest reports, we are ranked fourth most affected country by climate change for the period of the last 2 decades. And there is also rising sea levels and warming temperatures, which may be irreversible for hundreds or thousands of years to come, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. An estimated 13.6 million Filipinos would need to relocate to higher ground. Now, if you're wondering how sea level rise affects our communities, the New York Times once featured life in the coastal community of Batasan, which is a low-lying island with a population of 1,400 residents, and which is inundated by seawater at least 1/3 of the year. The residents of Batasan have learned to subsist on cold rice and coffee, and to tie up their valuables so that they wouldn't float away. And their goats, their animals are inside cages or stilts, and their crops are potted. They lift the floor of their classrooms, and the students would slosh their feet in the water, but their attention would be drifting as well during class. And the New York Times article quoted a resident who said, "People say this is because of the Arctic melting. I don't understand, but that's what they say." How then do we communicate to the people of Batasan the latest climate information that we know that rising water levels will continue for hundreds or thousands of years? And how about the decarbonization targets of countries of the world combined, which, according to the United Nations Secretary General, is going to be still insufficient to keep to the 1.5 degrees Celsius survival threshold by year 2030. And so the question about the importance of ambitious climate action for the Philippines is simply because this is a matter of life and death, of comfort and fear for us. We want to improve the quality of life of every Filipino, a life where they don't have to just accept and live through uncertainty, a life where they or we have the capacity to take action, and where we do not just survive, but we can also prosper and thrive. And the Filipino and the vulnerable populations across the world simply deserve no less. Ambitious climate action entails ambitious climate financing, and it's an ever-growing concern for developing countries. We need to prioritize resources for our development projects and programs, and it's a tough balancing act at the heart of governance, which the current pandemic has made even more challenging. We look at other domestic and foreign sources of funding to augment what is available, especially at the local level, where resources are needed the most. And at the global level, we continue to urge developed countries to deliver on their commitments to the Paris Agreement, particularly on the mobilization of finance, of technology transfer, and capacity building. And this is one crucial matter that we will bring to COP26, aside from our ongoing call to increase NDC targets to keep to the 1.5 global warming threshold. Domestically, we are turning to our partners in the private sector to support and accelerate investments in getting our communities ready to adapt to and reduce emissions. Certain laws and policies are in place that help enable the environment and encourage participation of corporations and financial institutions to actually invest in climate action. Our long-term climate priorities are embodied in the National Climate Change Action Plan, which identifies 7 thematic priorities. And these are food security, water sufficiency, ecosystem stability, energy, human security, including public health, climate-friendly industries and services, and knowledge and capacity development. Our local government units are mandated to come up with their local climate change action plans, which would identify their priority actions, specifically addressing their localities' climate risks and vulnerabilities. And these are considered or may be considered as the climate investment plan of the community. Our National Climate Change Action Plan has served as the basis for the Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, which we view as the national investment plan to modernize our technologies and systems and to transition our country towards a low carbon and climate resilient economy. We have committed 75% greenhouse gas emission reduction and avoidance for the period 2020 to 2030 for specific sectors, the highest emitting sectors of energy, transport, agriculture, waste, industry, and these are based on the country's projected economy-wide emissions for the same period. While our GHG emissions are comparably small or even negligible compared to the global average, our NDC also considers the likelihood that our emissions would significantly grow due to our population and economic growth trajectory. That's why we're being ambitious in our targets, and we will need requisite financing and resources to achieve this goal. Of the 75% target, 2.71% is committed to be unconditional, and the 72.29% will be contingent on external support. Looking at the energy sector, it remains to be the largest contributor of our country's emissions, and this is no surprise because we still have fossil fuel comprising a third of our energy mix. Now our electricity rates are among the highest in Asia and the region, yet 1.62 million Filipino households across the country remain without electricity. And so we welcome the recent developments in both the public and private sectors to build the momentum for renewable energy expansion. We welcome the Department of Energy moratorium on the building of new coal-fired power plants, which is considered as having opened investment potential for solar and wind and other types of renewables worth $30 billion for the coming decade. We also highlight the pronouncement of our designated chairperson in the commission, the Department of Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez, who has declared that the government is already looking at reducing the reliance of Mindanao on coal-fired energy as we are increasing the capacity of the Agus River system. This is planned in partnership with the Asian Development Bank, where a fund will be put up, where the government can invest in and partners as well to buy out coal-fired power plants and start repurposing them. The Asian Development Bank has also updated its energy policy to exit coal mining and power plants financing, noting that its old energy policy is no longer adequately aligned with the global consensus on climate change and the ongoing global transformation of the energy sector. Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has also issued a sustainable finance framework which will safeguard the stability of the financial system against potentially significant and protracted impact of climate change and other environment-related risks. The Securities and Exchange Commission has also required sustainability reporting across all publicly listed companies with a view of helping them identify and manage their investments according to their environmental, social, and governance standards or safeguards against climate and disaster risks. And this will make investments more competitive and attractive to investors. We also would like to laud those companies, corporations, and banks that have announced that they will divest from coal investments. These are big industry names that have said that they will stop coal expansion and instead invest in renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure. And we hope that they can do this sooner than later. With these key developments in the Philippines as far as ambitious climate action and financing by the private sector is concerned, more than just looking at figures that make a sound investment decision, we are all operating on the principle that there is no alternative reality where inaction on climate change will not cost us anything. The science and now even the economic analysis can no longer be denied that investments to reduce carbon emissions, to keep to the 1.5 goal and help increase adaptive capacities of communities indeed make good economic sense. And it will be this deeper sense of shared responsibility by every one of us in every sector that will pave the way for innovation, for more optimism and urgent action to shape a better world and lead our economies and societies to a green future. Thank you very much and good morning to all.
Thank you, Commissioner. For our final speaker today, let's hear from Mario Suelto, the Technical Coordinator of the Philippine Green Building Council, a national organization that is part of the International Initiative for a Sustainable Built Environment and is engaged in promoting green building practices. Mario is responsible for program development and research for legislative actions with national and local governments and in the continuous development of the Verde Green Building Rating Group.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Arup for inviting the Philippine Green Building Council to share our insight on the opportunities for professionals in the sustainability and in pursuing green building, especially in advancing towards the achievement of our net zero goals. As building professionals, it's important that you understand how your projects and your action in ensuring the sustainability and understanding how a product, a process, or a system has a great impact to the resource consumption and potentially negative impacts to the environment and our districts, communities, and cities. As highlighted by our previous speakers, our work in the building industry innately contributes to global consumption of resources and to emissions of GHG directly or indirectly. In addition, the building industry influences a complex supply chain that affects our use of resources and the generation of wastes and GHGs. We have seen countless examples of how a single development creates a big impact on the density in an area and influence the need for additional infrastructure and resources to support these changes in our districts and communities. This is why it is important for us to understand the impact of our building projects to our districts and communities and its burden to the environment and resources. Aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, green building is one of the best strategies to ensure the sustainable development of our built environment. Green building is a cross-cutting holistic approach to sustainable development for projects. And for the PhilGBC, green building refers to both the product as well as the process of designing, constructing, and operating buildings in a resource-efficient manner with the least negative environmental impact. The World Green Building Council, or the World GBC, identified green buildings with the following benefits in improving the quality of life of building users through good indoor environment quality, reducing the use of fossil fuel generated electricity, and even operational savings through the use of renewable energy, generating new opportunities for green jobs and decent jobs, spurring innovation to achieve higher efficiencies while reducing resource consumption, creating better interconnection and mobility in districts, communities, and cities through promoting pedestrian mobility and alternative transportation options, positively influencing the building supply chain, and even holding accountable our friends from the manufacturing and supply sector in improving how they create their products and deliver their services. We help in reducing GHG emissions and help combat climate change, reducing pollution and overall waste, and creating global connection and stronger partnerships for best practices and technologies. Globally, the World GBC serves as a global network in leading the transformation of the built environment to make it healthier and more sustainable. And collectively, the National Green Building Councils in about 70 countries drive action to achieve these global goals and promote sustainability in their respective jurisdictions. Each national GBC has been transforming their markets across the different sector towards more sustainable built environment. And we are organized in different sectors and regions across the world. And one of the most notable programs of national GBCs is the promotion and development of green building rating tools. These tools have been used to assess and recognize buildings which meet green requirements or standards. Each national GBC either adapt or adopt an existing rating tool or develop and administer their own green building rating tool for their respective country. The rating tools vary in their approach and priorities with respect to environmental, social, and economic sustainability, and may even be applied to different building phases, from conceptualization to the deconstruction of projects, and in different scales, from products to communities and districts to cities. For example, the Verde Green Building Rating System measures the performance of building projects above and beyond existing building and environmental laws regulations, and mandatory standards. When a project uses the tool and undergoes the formal certification process, projects are awarded with a star rating equivalent to the weighting achieved by the project. We use this rating to easily communicate with the general public the performance of these projects. By rewarding measurable improvements to a building's environmental performance, green building rating systems help create market incentives that are transforming building industry practices globally. For the Philippines, the national GBC is the Philippine Green Building Council, where we lead the action in greening our built environment. And our objective is to ensure that we have a sustainable environment where everyone can live, work, and play. And essentially, we rate, educate, and advocate for green building in the country. And we are focused on developing programs and tools to support green building projects, including capacity building and trainings, advocacy programs with the national and local government, and assessment, certification, and rating of building projects under the comprehensive set of tools for project proponents to help you in incorporating green building and net zero principles when designing, constructing, and operating your projects. We believe we can achieve our goals through holistic approach and sustainability. For the Verde Green Building Rating System specifically, this has been recognized by the Philippine government as the National Voluntary Green Building Rating System through the Department of Energy. And it defines the different aspects that we should be considering when developing a green building project, including management, the use of land and ecology, the use of energy, waste, and your generation, water and generation of waste, your use of materials, transportation, and its impact to your project as well as the community, health and well-being of your users, emissions, as well as community engagement and economic opportunities. As professionals, you may use these tools to support your implementation and increase the uptake of green building in the project, in the market. As a guidance tool, Verde and these tools are available for you to guide you in designing, constructing, and operating your projects in a resource-efficient, economically viable, and socially responsible manner. As a transparency tool, it can help you exhibit the performance of your projects to other parties in a credible manner and allow you to showcase your leadership in sustainability through an unbiased, balanced, and impartial assessment and certification of your project's performance. It can help you create a positive marketing advantage for your projects and even provide a positive brand recognition for your project as it highlights your sustainability initiatives as it achieves our global goals. And as a compliance and policy support tool, Verde recognizes the performance of projects above and beyond environmental and building laws, regulations, and mandatory standards. When a building is not compliant, it tarnishes the name of the company who owns it, the architects and engineers who designed it, the other project proponents who were part of the design, construction, and operations of the project. So managing regulatory as well as reputational risks may be done through the use of these tools with higher performance standards. So we have been seeing both private and companies as well as national and local governments using green building rating tools, net zero tools to help them create and develop their projects and even maintain and operate their projects. And we have seen a positive direction towards a more sustainable built environment as we have been seeing more examples of green buildings. And the project proponents who are involved and members of project teams who have been involved and have been increasing their capability in developing their projects have been one shift in our market that we have been seeing, which is a positive direction in achieving our sustainability targets as well as our net zero targets globally. So we have been seeing examples now of green buildings and net zero energy certified projects all around the Philippines. And it is very possible for us to achieve these goals and contribute to the reduction of global emissions and make sure that our cities, our communities, and our districts are resilient and are able to adapt to the changes due to climate change. It's important that we understand our contribution to the global climate crisis and how we contribute to advancing net zero to achieve our global goals. And you can learn more about the Advancing Net Zero Energy Rating tool online by visiting anzph.org. But with the road towards COP26, we will be seeing our global leaders discuss our next steps on how we address this climate crisis. And as professionals, it is best that you are equipped with the tools and information to ensure that you are responsive to these changes and ensure that your projects are resilient and adaptive to these changes. If you're interested in learning more about Verde and some of the tools that I've shared, you may contact the Verde Program Secretary at verde@philgbc.org. And of course, we encourage that you get your project certified and use the latest version of Verde or the ANZ program to help you in designing, constructing, and operating your projects and achieve your net zero or sustainability targets for your projects. Thank you once again to Arup for this opportunity to share with you our insight, and we hope our participants learn more and be inspired on how we can advance towards a more sustainable built environment.
Thank you, Mario. This officially includes the launch of our Race to Zero webinar series in Manila. We hope that the session was enlightening in providing an overview of our global and national status and progress in addressing climate issues and the need for cooperative approaches. So thank you all for joining. A recording will be uploaded to the event webpage. I'm inviting you to attend the next part of our series on Wednesday. We have a session on greening and energy systems from 11 a.m. to 12 noon, and then another one on the transport sector in the afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. Manila time. For those sessions, we have invited experts from the government, private sector, and civil society organizations to share their insights. You may view the details and register on the event webpage. So we hope to see you then. Maraming salamat.